All right, I'm here with Neil Hoyne, Chief Strategist at Google and author of Converted, the data-driven way to win customers' hearts. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Definitely. I'm really excited to talk to you today for a number of reasons. I am a human-centered design evangelist, and I love some of the work that you've done in your book as well as at Google. But I'd love to first just understand you as a person and your journey. What took you to where you are today?
Well, I'll avoid the entire bio. I'll avoid the LinkedIn thing. I don't think anybody cares about when I was a toddler. I'll give you what's more relevant to today was that I never actually had this idea that I would go into analytics, that I would go into data. I'm more of a storyteller, human-oriented storyteller at that. But what I found in Gap, and this was earlier on in my career, if we go back a little bit more than a decade, was that a lot of the data that connects people online lacks that human connection. We talk about people as hits, clicks, bounce rates, conversion rates. We lose the story behind them. And as a result, we lose the ability to connect with them. Companies focus entirely on KPIs without thinking about the customers who may be behind it. Everything just becomes an A/B test and an experiment. And not to say the data doesn't enrich the decisions that we're making, but you can't really have the head without the heart. And so what I found was not only was it advantageous to connect companies a little bit closer to what customers were doing, but that those stories allowed people inside organizations who may not typically look at themselves as being data or math people to suddenly to be able to contribute with the development of products, with the understanding of these behaviors, with a strategy of where the company should go next. And so it was really just a fortuitous intersection of what I love to do and what I can also do, which is I can do the data. But also, I love the customers and being able to merge those together into a story. And so that's really how it grew. And over the course of my past 12 years at Google, a number of increasing responsibility roles, but all of them around those same themes, which is to say, can you help people connect with their people, their customers, and really get a step beyond just data being abstract spreadsheets to something that is more actionable and workable.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's interesting. As a product leader myself, you're making me realize that I'm sort of speaking out of both sides of my mouth. I'm always talking about voice of the customer. I'm always talking about being customer-centric, and at the same time being data-driven and being sort of stoic about the decisions that we make. Right? Just believe the data. So expand on that a bit further. How do we connect those two in a meaningful way?
Well, I think the first thing is just to recognize the limitations of the data that we have. Data will tell us if we can measure something, that's how we'll see the world. We can measure short-term sales being more common, online sales, conversions, and instead going a step beyond that to say, wait a minute, there's customers. And we all know intuitively, yes, that conversion was caused by a customer, but we don't know how to measure it. And so that first step actually counterintuitively is teaching people, well, now that we recognize that there are customers there, here's how we measure who they are. Here's how we understand it. And the framework that really brings the two together is instead of me going through, and there's a metric we often use, customer lifetime value, that taps into that side of the brain that starts saying, I'm going to be KPI driven. Well, you need the KPI, but you also need the story. And so I often joke around these stories, and this is a lot of what came through with the book, was that let's talk about these people as having relationships first, whereas the KPIs simply tell us who they are. Very much like you would have close friends and family members in your life. You will have people where you buy from a store, they drive you home from the airport, where that is purely transactional. And so what we're really looking at for these metrics are who are those great friends, family members, and close confidants, and who are those transactional people? And we can tell you who they are. And then once you find them, just as there's people you can get along with in real life and other people you can't stand, let's start to focus and learn about what those behaviors and personas look like. What are they doing so that you can look at these customers to say, they're perfect for me versus I've known people like them and it never ends well. And you build that same intuition. And so what you're doing is you're using the data to support the language that you would have in the real world. So that way you can capture everything you've learned about business, around people, around relationships, and just say, well, how do we apply the same thing to an area that we can't directly see ourselves? What we can't see we can't see millions of people going to our website. That's where the data comes in, just to simplify it. And so a lot of people already have everything that they know. For a lot of marketers in particular, the challenging part is unlearning what they've been doing for the past 10 years, where it's all been data-driven and KPIs. You'd be like, no, I want to know conversion rate and how we improve the conversion rate. And you come out and he's like, no conversion rate. let's talk about the relationship you have with that person and what they're going to do next. Well, how do I do that? And that's part of the conversation. That's what makes it so much fun. And the imperative of it, though, is that companies are realizing that this is a better way to do business. They're realizing that they shouldn't put everybody in the same bucket. They shouldn't think that everyone's equal. They realize that people are people, not metrics. And so a lot of companies are moving in that direction to say, how do we create more human-centered, customer-centered design, metrics, and strategies?
So in my work, I realized that those are sort of two distinct bodies of evidence. So we go out and we do discovery research, right? We do customer interviews, we do usability testing, et cetera. And we try to create that story. This is our customer. These are our personas. These are, real customer testimonials and stories that go into the pain that they're feeling or who they are, what motivates them, or how the solution may or may not work for them. And then we've got this body of data that's tracking all of those transactions or all of those journeys in our tool. Mm-hmm. But can we marry the two together? Can we actually look at that data and say, this group these group of customers actually represent these personas, and this group of customers over here might represent these other personas, as you said, kind of the transactional versus the relationship.
That's exactly it. And that's where it's going. Mm-hmm. It's just, it's small, and it's small incremental changes that are making this happen. So for instance, you may meet with a group of customers, have a wonderful understanding, and you go to data science, and they give you thousands upon thousands of dimensions with those customers.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? It's easier just to talk to them and get to know them. Now, this is where machine learning comes in. Strip away all the hype from it. What is it doing? It's allowing you to look through a really large data set and say, here's what matters. So it's being able to see that customer, the same customer you met with and developed a persona for that you got feedback from, going through and saying, based on all of our customers, here's what we think matters the most to them. Machine learning was able to strip away all that noise and find patterns that are helpful. And the same way, you may look at customers and say, these are fantastic customers. Well, now we can predict and to say, what's this customer going to do next? Are they going to stick around? Are they going to leave? Do you need to send them a promotion, or are they going to come back again and pay full price? Or is this relationship over, which no matter how much time you spend, it's not going to get any better? And so what we're really looking at is you're taking that lens that you have of your customers, what you find in the same way you do a focus group with them coming in store, and we're saying we can use machine learning to tell you more about them, and we can use these technologies to predict what they're going to do next. And then you get to have that conversation and choose how you want to respond. If I have a customer that says, this customer is 99% likely to come back and buy from you again, do you need to send them that promotion? Or are you going to send them that promotion because you feel desperate? We can't lose somebody so valuable. Keep buying them flowers. We're in the courtship phase. Or do you say, 99% likely to buy, I'm going to waste my money and give away margin for somebody that's going to come and take my call or come and visit my shop and pay anyways? But those are the decisions we get to make. But now we get to do it from that lens to say, kind of nudging you on the shoulder to say, hey, I don't think this relationship is going to work out. And companies are just saying, well, do we want to listen to that? Or do we still have the unshakable faith that no matter how much time, money, and attention we give a customer, they'll love us? And more companies are just moving to the latter and saying, no, I trust this kind of stuff. Maybe I shouldn't spend time with them.
Wow, that's fascinating. So you're saying, so I can basically, I develop my persona, and I can have some smallish group of people that I know represent that persona. I can go find them in my system and say, okay, these are those users. Now apply these tools and find me other customers, or start to cluster those customers that represent that persona that I want to cater to the most. And here are the ones that maybe don't do so well, or we aren't a good fit for. And these are the ones that we want to maybe not put so much emphasis into, let's say.
That's entirely it. And I go through and I tell companies there's usually 3 steps to this transition. How does it happen? First step is simply the data part. Now, the data part is acknowledging to yourself that not only can you understand these behaviors, but can you predict future behaviors? Mm-hmm. Time for that for a lot of companies, a week, 2 weeks. A lot of the work has already been done. It's just, can we stretch your data in a different way? And then you become confident you can see it. Let's look at your customers instead of sales going backwards, possible sales going forwards. And once they see it and have confidence in it, now it becomes possible. Second, understanding the rules of the game. There's some areas where we can have influence on, at least as marketers, and there's other areas we cannot. So for instance, some companies will say, well, these people are terrible for me, but I can change them. Company is and how great my service is. No, that's entirely what the models are there to save you from, is to say you can't change them. Or if you were to try to change them, it's going to be very expensive and cause you a lot of heartbreak. Mm-hmm. How about we don't do that? And so you start to learn the rules about where things bend and where things break and how you find different types of people. And that's a fun part of it. That's the art of it, is to understand these kind of relationship principles. And then the third is, and this depends on the company size, is a transition to use what you know. Mm-hmm. If you're at a company that, say, is incentivizing everyone for the number of leads that you're bringing in, maybe you're a B2B company or an education company, or you're looking at app downloads, can you convince your organization that you don't need as many leads or as many app downloads if you can focus on those people that are going to spend the most? But that's an internal debate, and that's the cultural component. So one of them is all data. The other one is all looking externally. And the other one is really that evaluation of self, which is to say, can my company use these insights confidently? Or are we going to have, in some cases, board members that we sold on the number of new customers we could bring in, great or poor quality, and now we can't. And I tell companies at that point, at that third stage, it's really up to them. I can provide guidance. But oftentimes for people that go through this path, once they find out how these relationships are, they can't let it go. Mm-hmm. And so it's either they're going to fix their company or they're going to go leave that company and build one that can do it, because it's that powerful. These people spend a lot. These people spend very little. Why are we spending the same amount of time, effort, and love on both? And that's the spot you want to be, is just that awareness, so that it becomes so simple and so intuitive that you can use it.
Yeah, I guess that's sort of the core foundational principle of at least digital marketing in today's day and age, is if you can get the data and the knowledge to really understand who your best customers are, then you can throw a ton of money to acquire them, right? Because you know that you're going to get a high return on investment. But in the traditional channels or in an area where we don't have that information, we're sort of spreading everything around. Well, obviously we're wasting a bunch of money, but then we don't know who we really want to go after. I work with a lot of startups, and I get this question a lot that's sort of like what's the right amount or the right size investment at different stages into being more data driven, let's say, right? So, very early stages, a lot of founders just tell me, I'm hitting the pavement. I'm selling one-to-one. I'm marketing one-to-one. I'm interviewing one-to-one. And at what point should they make the investment? Because it tends to be not cheap. At what stage should they make the investment in these sort of data platforms and systems and start to make decisions based on the data as opposed to maybe their own intuition?
So in terms of the data and the metrics, I would argue day one or as early as possible. And the reason is that you want this type of metric, this perspective, to be baked into your company's reports and to its culture. You just want it to be there. It's not saying, well, we're going to hold out. We don't look at customer relationships until 3 years or 50,000 customers down the road from day one. Now, once you have that in place, let's talk about, well, what systems do you need to actually calculate it? Not a lot. A spreadsheet and somebody that may know Python, that's enough. These models are so wonderful because they're open source. They're publicly available. They don't require a CRM or a CDP. And so you can get away with that software layer. And so really what I'm saying is, if you have that understanding of what's available from day one, you can begin. Now, the question comes up to say, well, I don't have any data on day one. No, of course not. And so there are some principles, I think, that are more helpful. So one is, I don't think huge investments in enterprise software will help anybody. I think it's a waste of time. And Harvard Business Review had a study, 90% of companies admit their CRM implementations failed to meet their original objectives. Don't do it. It's a distraction. Basic data, basic models, basic understanding of the metrics. Now, you get out there, you just met some of your customers. You don't have a lot of transaction data. It's like, I'll borrow from these metaphors. You just started dating. You don't know who's good for you. You may have an idea in your head, this will be perfect. And then it turns out the reality will be like, these people are crazy. And so the principles matter more. And so here's what the principles are. One is, you want to know what data you need to capture in order to make these models work, to make sure that the questions you're asking your customers are robust enough. Just as much as you may say, here's what goes into a persona. You want to capture that information on day one so that when you do get to personas, you're not starting to capture that information then. And so it will help with the data that you capture. Number two is, You have to know the principles about how you explore. Number one mistake smaller businesses make is they don't cast a wide enough net in terms of the customers they're trying to acquire. They'll acquire friends and family members, people that already love them for their product, and their lifetime value, their relationship is higher than the rest of the world. Because these people love you. They want you to say, of course I'm going to keep buying your stuff. Well, you want to get out there and you want to date different types of customers. You want that feedback to say, here may be people I never thought about. They'll help me grow. Or maybe you'll come to a conclusion to say, no matter who I acquire out there in the mass market, they're not spending as much as my friends and family are. But you want that diversity in terms of your customer base. Oftentimes, companies start way too small. They're like, I want to find people just like my friends and family.
Or just like myself as a founder.
Yeah, lucrative, but really small. I want to find people just like me, sample size of 1.
Yeah.
Shit, that's expensive and good luck. And so what you're really doing is you're saying, I know the data I need to capture. Now let's go out and let's meet some people. And then after you do that for a couple months, you want to come back and you say, what did we learn? And as you go there and you capture more data and your business progresses, you're going to learn more and more about them until you feel comfortable to say, now I think I know who my large customers are. Or maybe you started the other way. Maybe you're glass half empty. You'll say, based on the data I've had, these are at least the people I should avoid. I know I have no luck with these customers. And so I'll do it as a process of elimination. Let's get rid of them. But that's the iterative process. So it's not day one, you go in, you start bidding for full customers and their acquisition value. No. Know what data you need to capture and get it. Start small, but just cast a wide net, meet different types of people, and then continually reevaluate that data to say, what are you learning from it? And then that's how the transition happens.
Fantastic. So you talk about KPIs, and I run into this a lot, right? Where a lot of companies, they really just focus on, like you said, revenue, lifetime value, growth, et cetera. But I see those as byproducts, right? If whatever it is that you're doing in that magic box of your company is going really well, then those byproducts will happen. But there's not something that you can really point to and really drive to say, well, that's the thing that's going to increase the revenue or the LTV. So what are some of those KPIs that you think are driving that customer centricity or driving the experience that creates the growth and the retention and the revenue, et cetera?
So you make a great point with the KPIs. Now, where I'll generally start with KPIs is I'll look at two things. I'll look at customer lifetime value and I'll look at customer acquisition cost. How much did it cost us to bring those people in? And then how much are they going to be worth to us? And I look at them very carefully because I saw this last week when I was at a conference at an individual customer level. If you start averaging stuff together, then you lose the plot, right? And I kind of joked with the group I was with. I was like, look, if I go home and I take a long trip and I see my wife and she's like, and she asks that question that invariably everyone gets from their spouse, partner, significant other, whoever. It's like, how much do you love me? There's a number of good answers I can give. I know the worst answer I can give is as much as everyone else. Because you're not respecting that person, that relationship. And that's the problem with using averages. When you use averages, you're saying, great customer, poor customer, doesn't matter. Into the bucket, together you go. We want to get that individual customer level. We want to know what that behavior is and what that data is. Now, then what I'll go is a step further. And I'll say, for those people that are high lifetime value customers, what matters to them? What matters to them? Is it the products that we're offering? Is it the price that we have? Is it free shipping? Is it service? What are those characteristics that connect most with that group? Those are the KPIs that I want to be optimizing for. If my high value group, I joke around with airline travelers all the time. High value airline travelers do not care about price, at least not as much as economy passengers, because they're often not the ones paying. Business travelers up front, it's often their company that's paying $10,000 for that international seat. Otherwise, if it was out of their pocket, they might be in the back of the plane. So it doesn't make sense to target those audiences and say, let's focus on price, because they tend to be less price sensitive. They care more about service quality. And so I know now, if I know that my high value customers care a lot about service quality, my creatives better emphasize it. My website experience better promote our service quality. If I'm investing in product, do I want to cut margin in order to lower price, or do I want to take that extra money and build into a better service experience for those customers? That allows me to prioritize. It's me going back to the customers that matter most and saying, what do you care about? And that's what I want to measure. That's why I want to invest in. Now, it's important to note that these preferences will also change over time. And so I want to continually reassess to say, does this matter more? Or maybe I use some discretion to say, look, maybe low price is important to my customers, but that's not the business I want to be in. Where do I find that middle ground? And so the goal, and this is what takes a lot of pressure off people, is the goal is not to be perfect with this, but just for your company, if you look at all the customers you acquired yesterday, is that bucket of customers worth more than the customers you acquired a day before? Are you doing a little bit better at connecting with them, at understanding with them? It's not to be perfect. We only want to go after these customers and not those. That's way too perfect for human understanding. Instead, you just want to go out there and to say, am I doing something? Is my website, my email campaigns, the way I prioritize phone calls, is it slightly more customer-centric than what I was doing before? And if you have that, and if you're saying yes, you will run far past all those companies that are going out and starting their day saying, how many orders did we bring in? X? Okay, let's bring in one more today. That's order-centric. That's product-centric. Customer-centric is, did I bring in slightly better customers? Did I do something slightly more for them than I did previously?
Oh, I love it. That's such a great insight. Let me see if I can reframe what I just heard here. So, interview your best customers or the customers that you really want to go after and understand what really matters to them, what dimension of your product or service they care about the most. And then using that as your North Star, measuring whether it's a fit or a quality or some sort of feedback that you're getting from them that, yes, we are delivering the thing that they care about, not only to a sufficiently high level, but that we're actually continuing to improve that over time.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
And then believe and trust that that's going to be the thing that's going to drive, up the LTV and down the CAC, right? Up the lifetime value, because you're making your existing customers happier and continuing to want to buy your product and service. But then since that's also driving your messaging and driving your sales strategy, that's also bringing down your acquisition costs as well.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. It's just connecting with the customer on the way and taking a little bit of pressure off your shoulders. This is where a lot of small and medium-sized businesses get stuck. They say, God, I need to know everything about my customers and I need to make sure everything's perfect and I have the right messages and I need all this data. I say, no, you simply need to be better than the next company. So they're looking to say, this company connects with me more than that company. And if that company is only looking at what you bought yesterday, and you're able to look ahead to say, this is what I think you'll spend in the future, now you're that better company. Now you're that better fit. And then it becomes part of that curiosity, becomes part of your DNA. What do they want from me? What don't they want? And the only thing you're doing is that you're prioritizing based on the future of that customer. So imagine how bizarre it would be to put 100 of your customers in a room and to say, all right, do you like the green ad or the red ad? And the majority of customers raise their hand for the green ad. And then you imagine if you did another test, you're like, all right, great. Now, all the people that are actually going to spend a lot of money with me, what color do you like? And they all raise their hand, reds. And they're like, oh shit, we're only 20% of this group. We didn't think anyone would hear that we love the red ad. And you're like, okay, good. Now I know how to reach you. I know what you want. And that's all we're doing. We're just adding that layer on top of it to say, instead of what you're doing today, let's predict what you're going to do tomorrow and we'll act on it.
Wow, that's fantastic. There's a tool or mindset that I use called the 10x factor. So basically looking at your competition, it's, everybody has their own strengths and weaknesses, and you really just have to pick one thing that you're going to commit to being better at than anybody else, but that probably will filter down your set of potential customers, because you might not have all the things that all the customers desire, but there's a niche within that market that cares about that thing more than anybody else, and that's going to be their deciding factor.
That's awesome. And that 10x thinking is important because it also challenges businesses not to look at small incremental things, but to do things big. It reminds me actually a Harvard Business Review article called Eager Sellers and Stony Buyers. And if you look at it, you type it into Google, you'll find this chart. It'll come up right away. They found something interesting that also helps to support this 10x perspective that you bring up. They said, when product managers develop new products or features, they tend to overvalue their baby, because they built this thing, by about 3x. They think it delivers 3 times more value than it really does for the consumer. And the consumer, for their side and their stubbornness, will say, my incumbent solution, the toothpaste I'm using, the car I have, they will view that as 3 times more valuable than what they already have, than what could be out there. So product managers think their products are 3x better. Customers think their current solution is 3 times better than it is. And so they say that things have to be 9 to 10x better to overcome those gaps. Then if you think small and incrementally, and you're only selling that's 2x better, your product managers are going to overestimate it. Your customers are going to ignore it. Go for those big changes when you can.
Yeah, no, that's phenomenal. Yeah, we always underestimate switching costs.
We
We might look objectively at a solution and be like, that is garbage. Why would anybody use that? I've got a much better mousetrap. But it's their garbage, right? Yeah. It's the garbage that they know, inside out, that they don't have to
comfortable with it. They're comfortable with it. It's like objective. It's like, why would you do that? And that's the same thing that I point out to. And this is why I like using these relationship metaphors. If you've ever been in a relationship where you look at someone and be like, why are you with him? Part of the problem we have with switching costs. Just like, I know this person. I know all their strange quirks and habits. I'm comfortable. And you're like, but you could do so much better with me. It's, difficulty just to switch them. And maybe you have an ego about it because you're saying these things. So you think you're 3 times better. These are very human behaviors. People love what they have. They're skeptical of new things. And that just means the easiest approach is not to change who human beings are, but just to make sure that you're making investments in things that are big, significant improvements over what they currently have.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing. Amazing insight. I want to switch gears a little bit too, because you are the chief strategist at Google, and this role of strategist, or the role of strategy in general, is something that I struggle with a lot with some of my clients. So I'd love to understand what that role actually means. What is it that you do day to day? And then I want to get into how do we actually systematically sort of drive strategy within an organization. So just start. Tell me a little bit about your job, I guess.
Sure. So let's start with the strategist part. Generally, you have functional roles inside organizations: engineers, programmers, analysts, if we're talking about data, that all contribute to various parts of how things come together. Engineers developing the code and the systems that will drive products. You'll have analysts who will go through and mine all this data. I tend to look at the strategy level as the one that tries to connect those dots. To say this is a direction that all these pieces need to go in order to be successful. Now, it's not looked at as an internal only mechanism as much as it is to say a strategy is not only looking at what we could develop, but what is the direction the rest of the market is headed, and where do we have an opportunity. And so it's looking internally and externally, and you can see how it gets very robust and very large. What's my data set? Well, for the past 12 years, I've been working with thousands of companies around the world, different verticals, different business models. And really my curiosity, data is a language that I speak, but it's more on that strategic level when you're talking to C-levels and boards, to say, 2 boards look at the same opportunity, the same piece of data, and maybe have the same competencies. Why do they see the world in a different way? Which one's right? How do they make decisions? What happens after that point? And so a lot of my work really is not to pitch specific products or solutions as much as it is to sit down with executives and give them a sounding board to say, this is what's happening elsewhere. Not with specific companies, but what you need to pay attention to. And so a lot of these things that we're talking about, this transition from individual short-term metrics to long-term KPIs, that's one of those strategies that's really taken hold in the office, where a lot of companies are trying to figure out, they're like, why? What's going on? So externally, you could picture a retailer sitting there saying, how is it that this company is growing in sales? Then you may look at it to say, well, they're selling more. We're selling the same products at the same price. Is it because they have free shipping? And now you're just falling onto tactics. What can you observe externally? Okay, Amazon has Prime, so I need to offer a Prime service to compete with Amazon. Those are tactics. I like to know strategies to say, all right, well, why Amazon has Prime is because it causes a lock-in with these particular consumers. They drive value through these portfolios of products. And this is how we apply a similar strategy or not to a different business. And so strategy is really just pulling together those components using a very, very large data set from a lot of companies and a lot of ideas to say, this is probably a better direction for you to head versus not.
Yeah, you make a great point there, being too stuck in the tactics. So whether it's a company that has a chief strategist role, or even if it's the CEO that tends to sit in that seat for quite some time, the piece that tends to be missing is good data or good information. So how do you and how could other founders sort of create systems or functions within their business so that they're being fed good information to help them make these strategic decisions without having to do all the legwork themselves?
Practically speaking, strategy roles, when they exist in organizations, are embedded too deeply, I think, to be useful for a lot of CEOs. Mm-hmm. Many that I talk to reach out explicitly to say, I don't have anybody that provides me with this insight. They all have their own incentives. And that makes it difficult not only to provide a neutral point of view about what's happening internally, but God help me, they don't have any perspective externally besides what's coming out in earnings calls. Mm-hmm. And so it's often someone that has that perspective outside, which is a much different role that companies haven't built. They have their CMOs responsible for marketing decisions. They may have a chief revenue officer who's grinding it out for internal sales. They're going to have someone building their product, someone running their technology stack, someone managing logistics, and somebody managing their cash. And when you talk about strategy, just everyone kind of collectively nods and says, well, I guess that's the CEO's job. The CEO's got to manage all these people, not to mention the investors and the boards, and to be the public face of the company. And they're saying, well, shit, where do I get this information from? And so we're actually seeing a group of people saying, what I really need to do is surround myself with people that are ideally external, but have that perspective where I can lean on them and say, what's going on? What should I challenge? To be in that room with me, but not to care about how I'm growing out a particular function in my organization. And so I don't think I don't think that strategist role is one that's been vetted enough through companies, but companies are finding value from it. Not large project, but just that other voice to say, here's how you should look at this data or this opportunity beyond what your teams are telling you.
Okay, so is this a consultant, or is this essentially a free agent works at the company but doesn't have any sort of alliance or allegiance to a particular department?
I would say it has to be a free agent, because I don't think a consulting model works well at scale. So if you take a classic consultancy, the large consultancies, they work very well because they're able to identify a process that they can repeat. Here's how you build an e-commerce site. Here's how you build a call center. We've built thousands of call centers. We know how to do it. Interesting in buying a company. Here's how you do the M&A deal. We've done plenty of companies. We can apply those frameworks, and you tap into that best-in-class knowledge. Here's a best-in-class way to build a call center. Mm-hmm. The reality is that when you start talking about this and say, well, who can give me a strategic perspective on it? The people that do these things at consultancies, they end up scaling it out and saying, I'm going to write a position paper that I'm going to send to everybody. Well, now all your competitors have that knowledge too, and it becomes commoditized. And so that's kind of the challenge. The people that I know that do this are a collection, and I could probably give you 100 or so people, but they're very, very good at small consultancies or as free agents to say, part of the advantage of our work is not everybody has access to this data. Not everyone can see what we see, which allows companies not only to have a lower barrier to implement that strategy, but also to make sure that the rest of the competition hasn't adjusted yet. And that's where the value comes in.
Keep it proprietary. Awesome. Yeah. So we're driving this, these great analytics functions within our companies. We're getting good streams of data. We've got our incentives aligned. Now, the big pitfall that I tend to find, again, companies that either have someone in a strategy role, or even if that role is sort of democratized or done by committee, is how do we actually execute that strategy and align our priorities so that we're prioritizing the important over the urgent? So how do you lead without authority in that sense?
I always look at this is where the data comes back, but it comes back in a slightly different way than a lot of people suspect. The first idea is that the data will tell us what to do, and that will sort out the emotions and the politics. We'll follow the data. But the data itself, if you work in it long enough, you know how to bend it. There's a great book, How to Lie with Statistics. It's a little bit dated because it goes back a couple of decades. I think when homes in California were only, $50,000. But the lessons are there, which is that oftentimes in companies, there's not enough data fluency to know what the data is actually saying. And that gives all the power to one team, the team presenting the data. They can craft that story the way they see it. And so the first thing I say is you need to have that data competency across the organization to be open, to be transparent about what we know and what we don't know. Second part comes in to say, what are the incentives of the people? So oftentimes company incentives are built around success. If you run an experiment, we want to recognize the people who had the right experiment. But should they? Should anybody really know the outcome of a test? Like if somebody celebrated me like, congratulations, Neil, you ran a great test. I shouldn't have known the outcome of that test. If I knew the outcome of the test in advance, that was a really bad test. But that's how often people reward it, is you did something and it happened to come out that way. And so more and more we see companies challenging to say, the incentive isn't for you to launch the product. The incentive isn't for you to run the perfect test. The incentive is for you to set everything up for success. So if you have a great hypothesis, backed by data, you have a way to test it in a way that the company could act, you still have that risk. We don't know whether that hypothesis will work out, but we will recognize and reward you based on the audacity of what you're proposing. Here's a transformational change we can make from the company. You found the data that supports it. You're not entirely certain, you shouldn't be, but you found our next big opportunity. When you put all the incentives afterwards to say, you built this product already and spent 4 years grinding away at it, it better be successful, then I think you've waited too long. Because now that product manager is sitting there to say, this product better launch. Because if it doesn't, what was I just doing for the past 4 years? Because you put the incentives all on that launch stage. And so I really take it earlier in the stage and say, I want to recognize and iterate with people on that original idea, the original strategy. And then the execution is really just against the metrics that I set out. And so it's just really changing the incentives to say, if everybody on your team is incentivized by making sure things appear successful, don't be surprised when all you get are great positive numbers. And that's just where companies go.
Interesting. So again, tying this all back together, if everyone is aligned on the same North Star metric of being customer-centric and driving better customer outcomes, and that is how they're evaluated, as opposed to how many widgets you shipped, then that will help align everybody towards a common strategy and a common goal.
It will. And just keep in mind, if you're trying to change your culture or your strategy, one of the pitfalls that often comes up, for decades, it seems now, people have been talking about transforming their business, digital transformation, data-driven transformation, all very compelling statements. And the thing you have to realize at its core, and this is the easiest way to sum all this up, is that whenever you're transforming a business, even in the most modest sense, you're moving resources from one team, from one person, from one department to another. Somebody will get more resources and somebody will get less. Now, people that get more, they're going to be your biggest supporters. I get more headcount, more budget. I get a nicer title. People that lose it will become your detractors. And oftentimes what happens in those cases, those detractors will grind your progress to a halt. And those people that improve will overemphasize the great opportunity and path forward, because why the hell not? It's great for them. Those are the two incentives I always pay attention to on projects. Who will win, who will lose. And what you want to keep in mind is, for the people that will lose, how do you make it so that it's something positive for them? If you find more data about how something's working in your business and it negatively impacts a team, that's not that team's fault. They did as much as they could with the data they had at hand at that time. Now you're showing them more data saying we need to go someplace else. How do you buffer them from the changes? And from the people that are going to win out because you make this change, I almost encourage, how do you separate them a little bit from your decision-making process, because their incentives are obvious. Kind of like if I tell my kids, like, we're going to go out and get ice cream tonight, and I give them a list of conditions, I promise you they will meet or exceed those conditions. You will have to clean your room. Now, the room's not going to be clean as you or I might define it. It's going to be, shit's going to be pushed under the bed, hidden in every cupboard, because the incentive is there. But the underlying mandate is, so it's to say, how do I create those incentives that aren't going to drive people to make decisions that are contrary? Say, this is great for my career, but I may not agree with this data. Or is it going to harm my career? And so I'm going to fight with this change. And so what you have to do as a leader is just be mindful to say, who are the people that benefit? Who are the people that don't from a change? And say, how do you mitigate that and soften it up for both sides so that the company looks at itself as getting better, and this process just being a readjustment of resources and people?
Interesting. So obviously it's a lot of stakeholder management, which makes it a very challenging job, especially in one where, like you said, there's sort of, I wouldn't call it, well, let's call it politics, right? But that there are personal motivations that might actually be opposing to the greater good or the needs of the company overall.
And but this will go back. This is a wonderful theme that we've been carrying on, is that it doesn't have to be perfect. I don't know a company where politics aren't involved. I don't know a company that's so crafty. It's like, no, everything is purely data driven and we're dispassionate about everything. No, and any company that tells you that is lying to you. I like the perspective to say, how do we simply make it better than what we were doing before? To say, now if we're moving resources, here's how we're going to take care of the people that are left behind because we're no longer investing in their program. And here's how we're going to soften the incentives for people that are taking it on. How are we going to use a little bit more data? How are we going to look at long-term customer behavior? I work with some companies, they're starting to look at lifetime value. They're still using all of their old KPIs. Nothing's changed, but lifetime value appears on their reports. And so those companies, they challenge themselves and they say, well, we're not using lifetime value at all. We're not looking at the customer. We're still looking at short-term sales. And I say, but it's in your dashboard, which means when people see creatives and campaigns, they're talking about it. They're curious about that behaviors. I consider that to be a step forward. You're not ready for the full step to change those metrics, but now your conversations are more even. And so I look at the same thing with incentives. If you change your incentive structure to be slightly more even, or your promotion process, you start recognizing experiments before tests are run. Those are all positive steps that on their own, far from perfect, but enough to make sure that you start seeing more growth and better improvement in your market.
I love it. I love the continuous improvement mindset. I'm an agile evangelist as well. I've been a Scrum Master my whole career, and my mission and my journey as an executive coach as well has been to apply those agile principles to every part of the business. So what you're saying is giving me goosebumps. I love to hear it.
And we didn't talk about any of this beforehand. Just for anyone listening, be like, wow, this is absolutely not. This is how I feel.
Off the cuff. So we've got, in the strategic role, obviously getting out of the tactics and obviously even just having the view of strategy, the challenges in aligning different stakeholders to drive the strategy. Now, the last big challenge that people in strategic roles run into is how do they measure the success of their efforts in strategy, right? How do we actually measure the impact of our strategic initiatives that tend to be long-term, that tend to be maybe a little bit nebulous or hard to separate from all these other variables? So how do you measure, again, the effectiveness of strategy in your organization?
So at least in the customer-centric strategy that we're talking about here, we're talking about calculating lifetime value for all of the individual customers you acquire. So picture a giant spreadsheet in your mind. Column 1 is all the customers' names. Column 2 is their lifetime value, how valuable those people are to you. If we take a finance perspective of this, right? Marketing perspective, high value customers, low value customers. Finance perspective, what do we look at? Every customer now has a predictable future cash flow. How much are these customers expected to pay back? Just like an investment in real estate, right? What are the cash flows we expect to see from this asset over time? Now we're just changing the language. The assets are the customers. What type of cash do we expect to see from these customers over time? Take all those cash flows, add them up. You end up with a really large number, customer equity. Terrible name, really big number, but important. What are the total cash flows we expect from all of our customers? Now, what I look at is if a company is going to invest $500,000 or $500 million, be a lot, but if they have $500 million into their marketing, then I want to know what is the change in those cash flows. So I care less about how many customers you brought in or how much they bought this quarter. What I want to know is that if I put X millions of dollars into my customers, into this asset, this customer equity, how much was I able to grow the value of those cash flows? And how did the attractiveness of that ROI differ from other places I could have put my money? Strengthening the cash flows less than what I could have gotten into the stock market or buying real estate. And what we continually see is that investments in customers have the best ROI. But where the transformation occurs is not simply how we're measuring it, but what it allows marketers and companies to do is instead of focusing entirely on that short-term ROI, that immediate sales number, because that's what finance was looking at, if they can now look at future cash flows and count that in their corner, then they can say, we can invest in customer service. We can invest in branding. We can invest in building great products because we know our customers are going to buy it. Hell, we can raise prices because we created such loyalty with our customers. We know they'll come back and they will pay it. And now they get to see everything working together. Right now, it's too siloed. It's a CMO going out and saying, so we did brand and brand affinity went up. And then everyone's mumbling here. So when are we going to see it in short-term sales? And that's why that customer-centric strategy is so great, is because ever comes down to the customer. Did they spend more? Did they stick around longer? And by how much? And now that we can look at this customer equity number, I can go easily to finance to say, here's how much all your customers are going to spend in the future. You gave us X millions of dollars. Here's how much we were able to improve that by. I don't need to sell you a story about all the underlying metrics and what they help drive. Those are my levers to pull. You just simply need to know I created something of value for the firm.
Wow. Oh, that's amazing. I love it. Well, we're almost out of time here. I really appreciate your wisdom and insight here. Are there any sort of final thoughts or advice that you would give to other executives who are trying to be more strategic or trying to drive a data-driven strategy in their companies?
I would just say pull apart a little bit from the slides and from the spreadsheets and the data. Those are all overwhelming. And just get back to that fundamental idea of who you're trying to connect with and why. Then the third question you need to ask yourself, and this is part of every strategy, is why am I to believe that you're going to be more successful at this than anyone else? Now, for companies that are trying to build great products or build operations to be able to ship products at a lower price, I'd argue that's a pretty high bar. You can build a better product than a company that may have more capital and more resources, but that's why that customer-centric strategy is so attractive. So many companies, based on their size, can't make that pivot. But if you're smaller and you're more nimble and you can see it, to say, what if I were to treat my best customers accordingly and my worst customers, not to fire them, but just to deprioritize them? It lends to tremendous sustainable advantages. And that's everything we're talking about. And so I think we created a lot of the building blocks for the listeners here, at least in my mind. That's where I hope things have gone. But just excited to say, now that you have a sense of that opportunity, think about what that practically means to your business today.
Fantastic. Amazing. Thank you so much. And for everyone out there, again, check out his book, Converted, The Data-Driven Way to Win Customers' Hearts. Neil, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate your time.
Eric, thank you so much.